The planet Zargon Prime was a monument to conflict, a world forged in the crucible of endless competition. Its very atmosphere crackled with a frenetic energy, a constant hum of challenge and rivalry. The Zargonians themselves were the architects of this environment, a species defined by their unyielding drive to dominate, to prove their superiority in every conceivable arena. And no arena was more revered, more central to Zargonian culture, than the Grand Kolosseum. Imagine a structure of colossal scale, a metallic behemoth that clawed its way towards the perpetually stormy skies of Zargon Prime. Inside, gravity-defying, platforms shifted and reconfigured, holographic illusions flickered and distorted, and the air thrummed with the anticipation of 100,000 screaming Zargonian spectators. They were a sight to behold, these Zargonians. Their chitinous exoskeletons gleamed under the harsh arena lights, their multifaceted eyes reflecting the bloodlust of the crowd. Generations of selective breeding had sculpted them into formidable warriors, each one a living weapon, honed for the singular purpose of victory. Tonight the Colosseum was particularly electric. A championship bout was about to begin, a clash of titans that promised to etch itself into Zargonian legend. But amidst this feverish excitement, one figure stood out in stark contrast. He wasn't Zargonian. He wasn't chitinous, or battle-scarred, or radiating an aura of fierce determination. He was Dave. Just Dave. A human. He leaned against a railing near the entryway to the arena floor, his posture radiating a profound disinterest that bordered on the sublime. Dave was, to put it mildly, out of place. His standard-issue jumpsuit, several sizes too large, hung loosely on his frame. His sandy brown hair was unkempt, and a perpetual smirk played on his lips, as if he were privy to some cosmic joke that no one else understood. He scanned the scene with eyes that held a mixture of amusement and what could only be described as boredom. The roaring crowd, the flashing lights, the palpable tension, none of it seemed to register. He might as well have been waiting for a bus. As the Zargonian announcer's voice boomed through the arena, introducing the combatants, Dave stifled a yawn. It was going to be a long night. So how did Dave, a guy who looked like he'd rather be napping than battling, end up as the human representative in the Grand Colosseum? Well, that's where the story gets complicated. You see, the Zargonians, in their infinite wisdom and labyrinthine bureaucracy, had extended an invitation to the Intergalactic Federation for a friendly exchange program. The idea was to foster interspecies understanding through a series of athletic competitions. Someone somewhere had ticked a box wrong, or maybe several boxes, and filed the form in triplicate, with carbon copies to 5 different subcommittees. The end result was a garbled message that the Zargonians interpreted as a formal declaration of gladiatorial combat. They, of course, responded in kind. Now the Federation, being a generally peace-loving bunch, was utterly bewildered by this development. They scrambled to figure out what had gone wrong, but the Zargonian challenge was already public. Backing down would be seen as an act of war, or at least really bad manners, in the complex world of intergalactic diplomacy. So, they needed a champion. Fast. That's where Dave came in. He wasn't a soldier, or an athlete, or even particularly good at anything that anyone could readily identify. He was a systems analyst, working a dead-end job on a space station orbiting a gas giant. But he was available, and he hadn't managed to dodge the draft notice that pinged into his inbox. Apparently, his skills in debugging ancient computer systems somehow qualified him for interspecies combat. The Zargonians, naturally, were appalled when Dave showed up. They had envisioned a genetically engineered super soldier, a pinnacle of human physical prowess. Instead, they got Dave. He shuffled off the transport ship looking like he'd just woken up from a nap, and promptly asked where he could find the coffee machine. The Zargonian High Council convened an emergency session. Whispers of incompetence, insult, and possible biological weapon disguised as a human rippled through the ranks. But the rules were the rules, and the challenge had been accepted. They were stuck with Dave. And as much as it pained them to admit it, they were also intensely curious. Could this human possibly pose a threat? The thought was both ludicrous and deeply unsettling. The training regimen was, to put it mildly, a disaster. The Zargonians, masters of rigorous discipline and advanced combat simulation, threw everything they had at Dave. He was strapped into neural interfaces designed to hone reaction times, subjected to gravitational centrifuges that simulated extreme combat conditions, and forced to spar with robotic combatants armed with laser lances. Dave's response to all of this was underwhelming. The neural interfaces gave him a headache, the gravitational centrifuges made him queasy, and the robotic combatants? Well, he mostly just tried to reason with them. "Look," he'd say, dodging a laser blast with a yawn. "I'm sure there's a union regulation against this. Shouldn't you be getting overtime for attempted manslaughter?" The Zargonian training officers watched in horror. Their meticulously crafted training program was designed to push warriors to their absolute limit, to forge them into unstoppable killing machines. Dave, on the other hand, seemed determined to treat it all as a particularly annoying video game. He'd lean back in his acceleration chair, casually munching on a nutrient paste packet, and offer unsolicited advice on the robot's targeting algorithms. "You know," he'd slur between bites, "if you adjusted the firing angle by like 3.7 degrees, you'd actually hit something." The robots, of course, were programmed to ignore such input. The Zargonians, however, were not. Their frustration grew with each passing day. They tried explaining the stakes, the honor of their planet, the centuries of tradition riding on this single combat. Dave would nod politely, then ask if they had any decent snacks. One particularly exasperated training officer, a hulking Zargonian with bioengineered combat claws, finally snapped. He roared at Dave, a guttural challenge that echoed through the training chamber, demanding to know why the human wasn't taking any of this seriously. Dave blinked at him, then shrugged. "Well," he said, "it's not like I asked to be here, is it? Besides," he added with a mischievous grin, "I've got a plan." The Zargonian officer just stared, speechless. He couldn't fathom what plan this utterly unprepared human could possibly have. But one thing was certain: the grand Kolosseum was about to witness something truly unexpected. Their doubts about Dave only deepened. He wasn't just incompetent. He was an enigma wrapped in a sweatshirt and cargo pants. The cultural misunderstandings only compounded the training fiasco. The Zargonians, a species governed by rigid social protocols and elaborate honor rituals, found Dave's behavior utterly baffling. Simple things like greetings became sources of immense confusion. The Zargonians greeted each other with a complex series of bioluminescent displays, each color and flicker conveying a specific level of respect and social standing. Dave, on the other hand, usually just offered a casual wave and a "Hey, what's up?" This was interpreted as either a profound insult or an unbelievably bold declaration of dominance, depending on which Zargonian you asked. Meals were another minefield. Zargonian cuisine consisted primarily of nutrient-rich algae paste and synthetic protein cubes, consumed in silence and with precise, surgically implanted utensils. Dave, however, preferred to eat with his hands, loudly slurping down his algae paste and making unsolicited comments about its flavor profile. "Needs more salt," he'd declare, much to the horror of the surrounding Zargonians. Their entertainment rituals were equally perplexing to him. The Zargonians enjoyed elaborate simulations of historical battles, meticulously recreated with holographic projections and sensory feedback. Dave, after enduring a particularly graphic reenactment of the Great Krill Uprising, leaned over to a nearby Zargonian dignitary and asked if they had any stand-up comedy. The dignitary, understandably, had no idea what he was talking about. Even clothing became a point of contention. Zargonian attire was highly regulated, with specific uniforms denoting rank, social status, and even preferred dietary supplements. Dave, however, continued to wear his tattered Earth t-shirt and cargo pants, stubbornly refusing to conform to Zargonian fashion standards. They offered him exquisite robes woven from bioluminescent silk, power armor forged from neutronium alloys, even a stylish helmet with built-in climate control. He politely declined them all. "Nah, I'm good," he'd say, adjusting his baseball cap. "These are broken in." The Zargonians grew increasingly frustrated, They couldn't understand this human. He seemed completely oblivious to their customs, their traditions, their entire way of life. Was he mocking them? Was he simply too stupid to understand? Or was there something else going on entirely? The mystery of Dave deepened with each passing day, turning their pre-tournament preparations into a chaotic exercise in cross-cultural bewilderment. They started to wonder if victory in the arena was even possible, when they couldn't even get their champion to wear the right pants. The day of the tournament dawned, casting long, ominous shadows across the Zargonian capital. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable tension that vibrated through the crowds packing into the arena. For the Zargonians, this wasn't just a sporting event. It was a sacred ritual, a demonstration of their species' strength, cunning, and unwavering commitment to victory. But beneath the surface of patriotic fervor, a wave of anxiety pulsed. The Zargonians couldn't shake their doubts about Dave. His training had been a disaster, his understanding of their culture non-existent, and his general attitude one of casual indifference. The thought of this human representing them, against the galaxy's most formidable warriors was nothing short of mortifying. The bookmakers were offering astronomical odds against Dave, with some going as far as to say that a victory for the human would trigger a complete restructuring of the Zargonian financial system. High-ranking officials nervously adjusted their ceremonial armor, acutely aware that their reputations, and possibly their careers, hung in the balance. A loss wouldn't just be a defeat, it would be a humiliation of epic proportions, a stain on Zargonian honor that would take generations to erase. Meanwhile, in the locker room, Dave was a picture of serene disinterest. He lounged on a gravity couch, idly flipping through a Terran magazine he'd somehow managed to smuggle in. The Zargonian team managers buzzed around him like agitated insects, attempting to give last-minute instructions, offer strategic advice, and generally instill some sense of urgency. Dave, however, remained unfazed, occasionally offering a non-committal grunt or a half-hearted nod. "Are you even listening?" One of the managers finally snapped, his bioluminescence flickering erratically. Dave looked up, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Relax," he said, "I got this." The manager sputtered, unsure whether to be reassured or even more concerned. As the roar of the crowd grew louder, signaling the start of the tournament, Dave calmly closed his magazine, stretched languidly, and sauntered towards the arena entrance, leaving a trail of bewildered Zargonians in his wake. The final briefing was short, stilted, and filled with thinly veiled threats. The Zargonian official in charge, a particularly bulbous specimen named Gladiator 7, cleared his throat, his multiple eyes darting nervously around the room. "Human Dave," he began, his voice a guttural rumble. "The council has reviewed your unique training regimen." He paused as if struggling to find the right words. "They have also taken note of your, shall we say, unorthodox approach to Zargonian customs. However," Gladiator 7 continued, his tone hardening, "the rules of the tournament are absolute. Each champion is permitted to select a weapon of their choosing. This is your chance to prove your worth, to redeem yourself in the eyes of the Zargonian people." Dave, who had been idly sketching in a notepad, looked up. "So, anything goes, huh?" he asked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Gladiator 7 hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Within reason, human. The weapon must adhere to certain safety guidelines, of course. No explosives, no biological agents, and nothing that violates the Treaty of Xylar." Dave nodded, seemingly absorbing the information. He tapped his pen against the notepad, a thoughtful expression on his face. The Zargonians watched with bated breath, wondering what exotic, terrifying weapon this strange human would choose. A plasma cannon? A sonic disruptor? A genetically engineered attack beast? "All right," Dave said finally, snapping the notepad shut. "I've made my decision." He reached into a small bag he'd been carrying and pulled out a can of whipped cream. The Zargonians stared in stunned silence. Gladiator 7's bioluminescence flickered violently, his multiple eyes bulging in disbelief. What is that?" he stammered. "Whipped cream," Dave replied with a shrug. You know, for desserts, goes great on like everything. The Zargonians exchanged bewildered glances. Was this some kind of elaborate joke? A subtle form of human psychological warfare? Or was this human simply insane? Glorbon 7, struggling to regain his composure, consulted his datapad, frantically searching for any rule that prohibited the use of dairy-based confections in gladiatorial combat. Finding none, he could only sputter. But why? Dave grinned, shaking the can of whipped cream lightly. Let's just say, he said, I have a very particular set of skills. Skills I have acquired over a very long time. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. He paused for effect, then added with a wink, plus it's delicious. The day of the tournament dawned, or rather, illuminated into existence by the arena's powerful artificial suns. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the air crackling with nervous energy. Zargonian spectators packed the stands, their chitinous bodies gleaming under the harsh lights. They buzzed with excitement, discussing odds, strategies, and the inevitable humiliation of the human champion. Dave, however, seemed remarkably unfazed. He lounged in his corner of the arena, casually observing the spectacle with a detached amusement. He might have been waiting for a bus, not about to enter a potentially lethal gladiatorial contest. He gave the impression of a tourist who had accidentally wandered onto the set of a war movie and was now just waiting for it all to be over. Across the arena, Dave's opponent, Gromak the Destroyer, stood poised and ready. Gromak was a legend, a veteran of countless battles, his scarred carapace a testament to his brutal career. He was a towering figure, easily twice Dave's size, armed with a wicked-looking energy blade that hummed with power. Gromak radiated an aura of menace, his every movement conveying a sense of cold, calculated violence. The contrast between the two champions was almost comical. Gromak, the epitome of Zargonian martial prowess, and Dave, the epitome of human, well, Daveness. It was David and Goliath if Goliath was expecting a serious fight and David showed up with a water pistol. The signal sounded, a piercing shriek that echoed through the arena. Gromak, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the structure, charged. He moved with surprising speed for his size, his energy blade raised, ready to strike. The bar. Crowd erupted in a frenzy of cheers, eager to witness the swift and decisive defeat of the human upstart. Dave, seemingly unfazed by the charging behemoth, calmly reached into his bag. He pulled out his chosen weapon, the gleaming metal can of whipped cream. The arena fell silent, the Zargonian spectators momentarily stunned into disbelief. Gromak, mid-charge, faltered, his multiple eyes narrowing in confusion. What was this thing? The crowd was silent. And then, laughter. It started as a ripple, a few scattered chuckles, but quickly grew into a tidal wave of derisive guffaws. The Zargonians, masters of war, conquerors of galaxies, were being represented by a can of dessert topping. Gromak, to his credit, recovered quickly. He tightened his grip on his energy blade, a flicker of annoyance crossing his faceplates. This human was clearly mocking them. He would pay. Gromak lunged again, faster this time, his blade singing through the air. Dave, with surprising agility, sidestepped the attack. He didn't counter with any fancy martial arts or energy blasts. Instead, he aimed the nozzle of the whipped cream can at the floor directly in Gromak's path and unleashed a generous dollop. Gromak, caught completely off guard, skidded on the unexpected slickness. His massive frame flailed wildly as he lost his footing, the energy blade whistling harmlessly above Dave's head. He crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and metallic armor, landing with a resounding thud that silenced the laughter in the arena. Dave, meanwhile, stood calmly, the can of whipped cream held casually in his hand. He surveyed the fallen Gromak with a look that could only be described as mild amusement. "Whoops," he muttered, almost apologetically. Gromak, sputtering and struggling to regain his footing, was furious. He pushed himself up, his multiple eyes blazing with rage. He roared again, a sound that promised pain and destruction. This time he would not be so easily fooled. He charged, keeping his eyes fixed on Dave, determined not to fall for any more culinary traps. Dave, however, had other ideas. As Gromak approached, he began spraying the whipped cream in a wide arc, creating a swirling cloud of fluffy sweetness. The Zargonians in the stands gasped. The scent of the cream, rich and decadent, filled the arena. It was a smell unlike anything they had ever encountered, a forbidden aroma that triggered something, a deep primal craving. Gromak, momentarily distracted by the intoxicating scent, faltered again. He blinked, his rage momentarily replaced by confusion. What was that smell? And why did he suddenly feel the urge to taste it? Dave seized the opportunity. He aimed a precise burst of whipped cream directly at Gromak's faceplates, completely obscuring his vision. Gromak roared in frustration, blindly swiping at the creamy substance that now coated his face. He swung his energy blade wildly, but with no target to aim at. He was just flailing. Dave, with a chuckle, danced out of reach, continuing to spray. The arena with the irresistible white cloud. The crowd was now in an uproar. Some were still laughing, others were mesmerized by the swirling whipped cream, and a few were even trying to catch the stray dollops that floated down from the arena floor. Gromak, blinded and disoriented, stumbled around like a drunken beetle. Finally, he tripped over his own feet and collapsed in a heap, his energy blade clattering harmlessly to the ground. Dave, seeing his opportunity, calmly walked over to the fallen Gromak. He straddled the warrior's chest, pinning him to the ground. Then, with a flourish, he aimed the nozzle of the whipped cream can directly at Gromak's open mouth and squeezed. A generous portion of whipped cream squirted into the Zargonian champion's maw. Gromak, still struggling, involuntarily swallowed. And then he stopped. His struggles ceased, his rage evaporated. A look of pure, unadulterated bliss spread across his faceplates. He closed his multiple eyes and sighed contentedly. More, he mumbled, his voice thick with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. Dave, grinning broadly, obliged. He emptied the rest of the can of whipped cream directly into Gromak's mouth. The Zargonian champion, now completely covered in the white, fluffy substance, lay motionless on the arena floor, a picture of utter contentment. The arena was silent. Then a lone Zargonian began to clap. Soon the entire crowd was on their feet, cheering wildly. They had never seen anything like it. A human defeating their greatest warrior with dessert. It was absurd, it was ridiculous, and it was utterly undeniably brilliant. Dave stood up, brushed himself off, and took a bow. He had won. He had faced their strongest champion, and won with a smile, and a can of whipped cream. The cheering continued, deafening in its intensity. Dave, still slightly bewildered, couldn't quite grasp the magnitude of his victory. He hadn't really expected anything, to be honest. He certainly hadn't anticipated becoming a Zargonian folk hero by weaponizing a dairy product. But the explanation for the Zargonians' bizarre reaction wasn't far behind. As the arena cleared slightly, a high-ranking Zargonian official, adorned with even more elaborate metal plating than usual, approached Dave. His voice, translated through a device on Dave's wrist, was surprisingly meek. "Human," he said, almost reverently, you wielded the sacred cream." Dave blinked. "Sacred cream? You mean this stuff?" He held up the empty whipped cream can, shaking it slightly. "I got it at a space station convenience store, marked down because it was dented." The official's numerous eyes widened. Dented? Irrelevant. The cream. For centuries, Zargonian scholars have whispered of its existence. A substance of pure, unadulterated pleasure. A legend. We believed it to be myth. It turned out, buried deep within ancient Zargonian texts, were references to a substance known only as the sweet nectar of the gods. These texts spoke of its euphoric properties, its ability to induce a state of perfect bliss, and its extreme rarity. The Zargonians, a species that had long ago suppressed any form of hedonism in favor of ruthless efficiency, had dismissed these stories as fanciful folklore. But the memory of the sweet nectar lived on, a suppressed desire buried deep within their collective consciousness. They had encountered the ingredients for whipped cream before, but their technology hadn't advanced to the point where they could combine them correctly. Some Zargonian scientists had dedicated their lives to trying to figure out the ingredients but were ultimately unsuccessful. It had become the stuff of legend. The official continued, his voice filled with awe. Its ingredients are found on only a handful of planets, and the precise method of combining them, lost to time. We dedicated hundreds of scientists to try and find out more, but to no avail. You, human, have not only rediscovered it, but you weaponized it. It is genius. Dave stared at the Zargonian official, then back at the empty can. Wait a minute, he said slowly. You're telling me this stuff is like the Zargonian equivalent of like the Holy Grail? Or a really good donut? The official nodded vigorously, his metal plating clanking. Indeed, its value is incalculable. You have brought our champion to his knees with something we have desired for eons. The pieces began to fall into place for Dave. The Zargonians' obsession with the arena, their rigid discipline, their suppressed emotions. It was all a desperate attempt to find some kind of release, some fleeting moment of pleasure in their otherwise sterile existence. And he, a humble human with a can of discount whipped cream, had accidentally stumbled upon the key. He had won not because of superior strength or skill, but because he had unknowingly tapped into the Zargonians' deepest, most secret desire. He had, in essence, defeated their strongest champion with a sugar rush. Dave couldn't help but grin. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to bear. The arena erupted in a fresh wave of noise, not of bloodlust this time, but of something akin to longing. Zargonians, usually so stoic, were openly weeping, their metallic faces glistening with what Dave could only assume were tears. The air hung thick with a strange mixture of confusion, admiration, and a desperate unfulfilled craving. It was like he had accidentally shown up to a heavy metal concert with a bubble machine. The official, regaining some composure, turned to address the assembled crowd. "People of Zargon," he boomed, his voice amplified across the arena. "We have witnessed a miracle. The human has shown us the true meaning of sweetness. Let us not forget the sweet nectar of the gods." A ripple went through the crowd as the name was spoken. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into a collective chant. Sweet nectar, sweet nectar, sweet nectar. Dave watched, dumbfounded, as thousands of heavily armored aliens began chanting about whipped cream. He was pretty sure this wasn't in the intergalactic travel brochure. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Zargonian scientists swarmed the arena, desperate to analyze the residue of the sacred cream. Philosophical debates raged about the nature of pleasure and the merits of abandoning their centuries-old commitment to stoicism. The more adventurous Zargonians began experimenting with other human delicacies, discovering the joys of chocolate, the mysteries of pizza, and the utter bewilderment of Vegemite. Dave, meanwhile, found himself elevated to an almost godlike status. He was given the keys to the city, which admittedly was just a slightly larger metal shard, and was offered every conceivable honor and reward. He politely declined most of it, except for a lifetime supply of the Zargonian equivalent of caffeine, which turned out to be surprisingly potent. But the long-term consequences were far more profound. Zargonian society underwent a seismic shift. The arena, once a symbol of their martial prowess, became a venue for culinary experimentation. The warriors traded their weapons for whisks, and the battle cries were replaced with excited chatter about new flavor combinations. The Zargonians, it turned out, had a serious sweet tooth. Dave, of course, became a legend, known throughout the galaxy as the whipped cream warrior, the human who brought joy to a civilization that had forgotten how to smile. He tried to explain that it was all a big misunderstanding, that he was just a regular guy who liked a good discount, but no one really listened. They preferred the myth. Eventually, Dave shrugged and embraced his newfound fame. He opened a small restaurant on Zargon, serving a variety of human and Zargonian fusion cuisine. It was a hit, naturally. He even started a whipped cream appreciation society, which quickly became the most popular social group on the planet. As he looked out at